All right, I'm going to move it now to item number 5 on our agenda, which is our Finance and Audit Committee. And I'm going to ask Tony Gugliata to chair this next section of our agenda. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So the committee met last week. We really spent a lot of time, reviewed a number of reports. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to sort of go through all of it, but just maybe provide a brief summary on some of the topics we covered. So we received 2 reports under the consent agenda. We an update on liquidity and borrowing requirements, as well as our ongoing third quarter commitments in excess of $1 million. No major issues were raised from our review, and so they were accepted under the consent agenda. We then turned our minds to the internal audit program. We received a report on all the activity in the previous quarter. So 7 projects were completed, 9 projects still remain underway. One of the projects was an internal audit which covered the SkyTrain procurement practices. So SkyTrain actually procures 17,000 inventory items or purchase orders which are worth about $23 million. So the scope of the audit really focused on the internal control practices over that procurement process. And the good news is that the audit concluded that the internal control practices were very strong. The committee also reviewed the 2019 interim strategic internal audit plan. Now this plan only covered up to the period of the end of Q1. As you know, there's a new incoming executive director of internal audit, and so we wanted to, or the department wanted him to participate in the development of the full plan for the full year. And so we'll be taking a look at that a little bit later on in 2019. We also talked about resourcing and whether there was adequate staff. And based on the update we received, I think we were comforted to know that there are resources in place to complete the plan. And then we concluded our discussion with an in-camera session with the internal auditor. We also reviewed a number of reports that were also being reviewed by the Planning and Stakeholder Committee and are being recommended to the full board today. So these reports will be considered later, and they included the public art policy and amendments to the major road network. We then received a pretty comprehensive update on our major capital projects. The first was the Broadway subway. As you know, the provincial and federal government approved the business case and funding back in September. The province is actually going to deliver the project, so we recently signed an MOU with the province that formally transfers the project over, and more importantly, I think outlines what TransLink's role is going to be in an ongoing basis with the project. We also received a report on the ongoing condition monitoring that we undertake on the Patella Bridge, and these inspections ensure that the ongoing safety of the bridge remains a high priority for TransLink. We then received an update on the Expo and Millennium Line upgrade. Now this is a pretty significant project. It's actually 13 projects with a total budget of just under $2 billion. So phase 1 projects underway. We did get a bit of an update earlier in terms of the new SkyTrain vehicles, which are now just arriving and being put into place. Another project that's going to be starting is the expanded vehicle storage, which has a target completion by the end of 2019. The other projects are part of the phase 2 approval, and so those projects are essentially undergoing either feasibility studies or conceptual design activities, and obviously they will be ongoing throughout 2019. Kevin mentioned the station upgrade program, so we got an update on that. The 4 stations are complete, 3 are remaining. 2 of those will be done in a couple of months, and the last is Joyce Collingwood, which will be completed by March of 2019. We then spent some time on information technology. It's a pretty robust program. It includes 33 projects. 23 are currently in progress. 10 have been completed so far this year. We spent a lot of time talking about our IT security program and our efforts to sort of protect TransLink from cybersecurity threats. This does remain an area of focus and priority for the team, and the team did update us on a new security framework for assessing their program, which provides for better alignment with TransLink's risk and technology direction. So that new program is being put into place as we speak. We then undertook a little bit of time in terms of talking about our enterprise risk management. As you know, we undertook an internal process that's organization-wide that identified the top risks for 2018. 10 risks were identified, and the committee received and discuss really a status update on each of those risks, as well as the treatment plans that are currently in process that deals with those risks. So that concludes my report, and if I'm allowed, I can just move to the next agenda item, which is 5.2, the consent agenda. As I mentioned, these basically cover the capital projects, the Broadway Subway and the Patella Bridge. We did review and discuss these reports, and they're included in your package for information purposes. So if there's any questions, I see Zanny sitting just behind us. He'd be more than happy to answer that.
Any questions in regards to the consent agenda?
Okay, seeing none, I will then move along in terms of the agenda item. So the next item on the agenda is the business plan for 2019. And as you know, a lot of work has gone into developing this plan from staff throughout the organization. This work began months ago. In fact, in September, the Audit and Finance Committee reviewed the assumptions that were used in the development of the 2019 budgets, and these assumptions covered both cost and revenue drivers. This was followed by a budget workshop, which was attended by the full board on October 24th, where we really reviewed in quite some detail sort of the initial draft of the budget. We also received presentations from the operating divisions and how their budget submissions were really focused on achieving the initiatives that were set out in the 10-year vision. The final draft was reviewed and discussed at our meeting of November 29th, and that's included in your package. And Rob is actually going to provide a bit of an update, and then obviously he'll take questions if there's any on the 2019 budget.
Welcome, Rob.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tony, for the introduction, and thank you all board members for the opportunity to talk more about the business plan and the budget. You'll see that the comprehensive documents in your package, so I'll just be hitting some highlights in terms of the key components of the budget and plan. And just as context to remind you that the way we do our business plans and budgets are in full support of the strategic business plan of the organization. And in that regard, the strategic priorities is really the context for organizing the work that we've done in here, and I'll be talking about it through those themes in terms of all three of them. The first is providing more and better service region-wide. I won't go into all the details. Kevin explained some of that in terms of not just our history, but also going forward in some of the operating company results as well. We have significant increases in expansion there. We also have smart investments in maintenance and repair of our systems for safety and reliability. That's both on the proactive side as well as reactive and dealing with issues as they come up. And we also have a lot of focus, as you've heard all throughout, on customer experience and information systems that are fundamental to that, including the evolution of our information systems to keep up with the capacity and the growth, tremendous growth that we've been encountering over the last short while as well. So in terms of the more and better service region-wide, here's a list of a number of the service expansion items that were a part of the Mayor's vision and the investment plan that was already endorsed and approved by the Board and the Mayor's Council. So this just goes in line with that for the 2019 deliverables. You'll see there's a number of new buses, 178 plus the 32 new double-deckers. Launching of the B lines that you're aware of, and increased handy dart service, and the Mark IIIs that were talked about, and a new C-bus. There's also technical support, as we talked a little bit about, with regards to the Millennium Broadway line that's ongoing, that we're accountable for supporting that work, as well as determining best options for improving rapid transit south of the Fraser, which is a bit of an evolving story, but we definitely have the resources and allocation of time and effort to be able to support that work. In terms of the smart investments in maintenance and repair systems, we have there's a lot of repairs to the SkyTrain's running rail, as Hayden has articulated, in addition to upgrades of elevators, escalators, and other systems. There's also a lot of work happening on the advance of a program of preventative and corrective maintenance of bridges, as well as systems that we've talked about as well. The implementation of a health and safety system across the enterprise is a real focus right now across the organization, with all the operating areas is included, including TransLink at the corporate level as well in terms of response, especially on emergency management. And customer experience, I think we talked about most of these things, so I won't go into too much more detail, but there's more work happening, especially around the connectedness and core foundation, under which we'll be able to deliver better solutions, better information at the right time for our traveling public to help them along their journeys. So getting into the budget, the consolidated revenues. So the story we have for the revenues overall is that you'll see here that we have a 2.6% increase in our revenues. Our total revenues are over $2 billion now, budgeted for 2019. And it's important to kind of look at the allocation of the budget as well. The value, seems to be a little error on that sheet there. That should say $874.6 million. And that I think is correct in the document that came out to you. So taxation revenue makes up a big portion still, the majority at 43.4%. There's very modest increases in that, which I'll be talking about. Transit revenue at $669.3 million makes up the next largest portion, which is about 33% now of our total revenues. That's mostly through fare revenue, but there are other programs we have on the non-taxation side that also fall into that, including on the commercial side. And then we have government transfers, which is partly an accounting thing, but also, I'll talk a little more about, but makes up a significant portion of what we have to record as revenues as well for the agency overall. If I was to exclude government transfers, which I'll talk a little bit about the volatility related to those and the nature of those revenues, our overall revenues are increasing by 5.5%. That's important when I come back to talk about expense increases as well. So it's about 5.5%. Transit revenues are increasing by about 10.3%. That's both in line with what we expect, an increased ridership, etc. A slight fare increase, as well as starting point is very much stronger based on our successes this year in terms of leading into next year as well. So one area of revenue, there are two areas of revenue that we're going to talk a little bit about that we've been challenged with in 2018. So I wanted to really make sure we understand how we approach this for 2019, is fuel tax revenue. We've talked a lot about the trend on fuel tax revenue has been down 2018 budget, so we have reflected that as well in here. So the 2018 budget you'll see for, and then transit revenue. Transit revenue has been the opposite story. Obviously our transit ridership has been far in excess of what we had budgeted and expected, so with that comes increased revenues. So you'll see transit revenues is a higher dollar amount than fuel tax revenue to begin with as well, quite a substantially higher amount. So if I start first with transit revenues, our forecasted increase is about $29.4 million for 2018. So that's in comparison to fuel tax revenue, which we have a deficit of about $35.3 million forecasted for 2018. So they're almost offsetting, not quite. Still, we have a little bit of a shortfall that we are able to make up in our budget overall from other sources of revenue and expense controls. However, that set the tone for how we were approaching 2019. So in 2019, we started with transit revenue with a higher base and then did an increase of a modest increase of about 2.4% growth on top of that with ridership. And again, that's in comparison, in contrast to what we just showed, Kevin showed with 6.9% year-to-date growth this year, and 5.5 I believe last year, and about 4.7 the year before. So we are being a little bit more modest with our assumptions based on that unprecedented growth and whether and how long that could be sustained. This is more based, so some of the assumptions down below are there to kind of help provide the context as well. That's in the context of 2.4% increase in ridership growth and a 1% employment growth, about a 1.5% growth in population is expected in Vancouver during this time, or Greater Vancouver I should say, during this time as well. Fuel tax revenue, so we basically took the lower base and did a really modest increase, a much lower increase than we otherwise would have to make up the budget for 2019, because you can see the budget for 2019 at 369 million almost is below the budget well below the budget of almost 20 million from the 2018 time period. So we're not expecting a rebound in that in any way. We're just, in fact, just trying to expect a conservative. This is an area, especially in light of the province's commitment, City of Vancouver and others. We know the fuel tax revenue, even more so, is going to be challenged as a source of revenue, and probably one of the biggest risks, on our revenue side going forward in terms of the longer trajectory. We think we've handled it all right for 2019, especially given that we have a little bit of a hedge on ridership growth that can offset that if we hit some adverse areas. But it will be definitely a focus of attention. This needs to be placed more forward looking in terms of strategically. On other revenue to fund the future expansion, so I'll touch a little bit on the taxation side now of revenue. We see that as per the investment plan assumptions, the property tax increase is about a 3% increase on the base, 2.3% from development and construction growth. And so it's about an additional $10 million. And parking tax rate increase of 3%. That's, there'll be a resolution a little bit later as well related to that. And that takes effect July 1st. So the impact of that is only for less than, for half the year into the 2019 budget. So it's not going to be a full magnitude of that increase, but again, it's a modest increase in terms of what's expected there in terms of changes. On government transfers, so government transfers, the reason we're highlighting this is for two reasons. One of them is it makes up about 19% of our total revenues, so it's material that way. And the other part, it's volatile in the sense that it's matched with when we actually make the expenditures. It's how we have to account for the money coming in. So it makes up two major components of this. On the senior government side would be money coming in from the federal government and contributions that retain as assets under TransLink. We have to record it as revenue coming in, and then retain the assets. So as we build it, we get the money. So sometimes when we have delays or different programs, they'll cause variances on our revenues, which are only for that reason. They're not reflected in any other way. And then the other part comes in as well from the province in terms of the toll, the Golden Ears Bridge toll replacement mechanism that comes in. And finally, we have fuel tax revenue that's allocated to the region through Metro Vancouver from the federal government that pays for a lot of our buses purchases that comes through this program as well. So on the expense side, our consolidated expenses are about $1.8 billion in comparison to the $2 billion of revenues that we're budgeting. And again, we have some problems with the numbers in here. I apologize for that. The overall, what these are reflecting is basically that most of our expenses are with our bus operations, about 43% of them in the blue, and about 18% in the orange on the rail. Operations overall is about 68% direct services, I would say, including the roads and bridges, is about 68% of our total expenses. About 22.5% is made up on the top left side, which is financing costs and principal repayments with regards to debt. And then the rest is made up of other sources. Our expenses are pretty well managed to make sure that we're optimizing the use of expenses to support expansion of services as a first priority. Like we said before too, we have a lot on the maintenance and ongoing side to make sure that we keep a state of good repair across our system and reinvest back in our systems and our people, appropriately. So those are being managed. If I remove amortization and some of these other items and I focus on core expenses, which I show on this page, continuing operation expenditures, the increase is about 5%. In terms of total. The total expenses is about 6.7% growth, but that's because we include all those different areas. If I exclude them and just look at continuing operations, about 5%. So it's lower than our revenue growth. And a lot of that is based, as you can see on here too, in terms of salary and wages and third-party contractual increases. A lot of those are contractual in terms of inflationary generally and the like. We do have some money in there for investment in priorities. That's above and beyond kind of the core operations, but it is to do with key areas that we think that are prudent and have been well vetted through the organization in terms of important asks. A lot of those are in our operating organizations and entities as well. So now I'll switch over to capital. The capital program is quite large. This is the first major year of capital expenditures. So it's $3.8 billion. So that's big, and you'll see the majority of that is on implementing the mayor's vision of $3.5 billion. That's made up of these key components, which is the conventional bus expansion, investment in the transit priority on the corridors. The Expo Millennium Line upgrade program is a large program of about $1.5 billion. It's not one of the two major projects, but it's one that we're managing internally, but has significant contributions as well as a significant impact on improving our capacity throughout the system as well. We also have money in there for major road network and bike infrastructure of about $78 million. And the two major projects as the Millennium Line extension, as well as south of Fraser Transit, which are budgeted in here as well. The capital program related to the state of repair is about $325 million. This is made up of a number of projects, which include an asset management system that we talked about, the rail system, rail side as well in particular, as well as automated train control replacements, the escalator programs, and bus security camera replacement programs. Even C-Bus terminal refurbishment is on there, and traction power equipment upgrades and Expo Line running rail replacement, which goes throughout the rail system as well, is a part of this budget that is contained in this area. Now we have customer experience. It looks like a small amount at $15 million. These are above and beyond the customer experience amenities and other areas that are handled as part of the refurbishment of stations and other things. So it's above and beyond that. And we also talked a lot about different systems that we're putting in place to improve communication and notification and other things within our traveling public on the customer experience side. So in this case, we highlighted some of those key areas that are above and beyond that, which have a budget of about $15 million in total. A lot of them have to do with technology improvements, improvements to the reservation system for Handy Dart, fare gate capacity increases, and customer amenities throughout the system, the major items in there. And in summary, we talked about the first area, which is really the key risk in our plan, I would say on the revenue side, and taking prudent conservative measures probably is the best kind of mitigation plan we have at this point with related to it, because it's really more of a behavioral thing, a system and what's happening out there. And like we said, it is partly offset with higher fare revenue. We're on a good trajectory there, but again, we don't want to over rely on exceeding ridership growth as the only mechanism to offset that. So we'll have more discussions with that with the board and our mayor's council as we move forward. The other big risk when we talk about our plan is it's quite aggressive. It's another aggressive year. It's probably even more aggressive in some respects than last year. So therefore, recruitment and ongoing talent attraction is a key focus. And another area that I really want to talk about, because it came up earlier around diversity, inclusion, equity, and taking those into consideration when we're focused on recruitment and retention of employees, is becoming more and more important. And we do realize that we need a more comprehensive program in the organization that goes across the organization, including the different subsidiary entities and us. So we are embarking upon that, starting immediately in terms of a program, and we will be talking more and looking at recommendations that come forward from that. We have staff groups that have already been working on this, and HR has already budgeted this within their plan as a key area of priority and some money. So we will be putting some more attention and share it with the board as we proceed going forward, not only to help us on the attraction side, but also just really that retention of talent, and setting some more ambitious goals and objectives as to what commitments do we want to make in this regard of regarding diversity and inclusion in particular. We also know that training is really important. Mike talked a lot about operator training and bus driver training, and Hayden talked about it on the train company, but we need training across our whole management system as well, in terms of the changing evolution of our system and what's happening, as well as to become more effective. They're the first line, that employees talk with and create an environment that's productive for employees. So we really need to make sure that we up our game there, and we're really focusing a lot of attention. We've been all hands on deck, I think, on the HR side around recruitment. So it's really, this year we're really going to look to diversify around those other elements that are really important to us. I just thought I'd mention those because I didn't put them in terms of the focus areas. The additional budget for aging infrastructure, keep our system safe and reliable. That's always, the more information you know, the more accountable you are. So that is something that we're trying to do both, find out more, get a better understanding through better asset management systems and information of our system, and then making sure our response and our investments are appropriate given what we're learning and moving along. Definitely focus on delivering the commitments, and that is something that you can see that we have the money behind, etc., and we're really making sure we have the talent there. And ultimately, I would say that the other backdrop to all this, I'm not showing you all the debt measures, etc., but we retain a very strong rating with our rating agencies. We share our forecasts, including the investment plan, with our rating agencies as well, in terms of where we're going and how we're going to get their feedback, and that was reflected in the most recent substantiation of our ratings by our two rating agencies. We maintain a very strong fiscal position throughout our plan, especially through 2019, to make sure that we could deal with volatility, as well as the increasing requirements for borrowings, etc. And you'll see another resolution item coming around our credit facility, just to make sure we shore up our backdrops in case of in case we need them, as well as just provide us better assurance in the background. And we also are attesting to the fact that our budget and our financial plan it meets all financial policies and regulations that are set out in front of us as well. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you.
Great. So Murray?
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Tony. The question that crossed my mind, we were talking about the fuel tax revenue changes, and we are projecting a 2.4% increase in ridership in 2019. And the base of reference for that, we've got quite a strong ridership growth over the last 3 years. I can't remember what it was, but let's just say about 6 to 7% a year, plus or minus. And I realize part of that relates to system expansion, part of it relates to latent demand that's now moved to transit as its mode. And I'm curious as to whether, like 2.4%, my question really with the backdrop is this: are we delivering everything we can deliver while still being fiscally responsible in 2019? Because clearly there's people are moving to transit, and I want to take advantage of that. We collectively want to take advantage of that. So the 2.4% number is how many hours of expansion on a percentage basis against our current system are we adding in 2019 in comparison to that number? Now I realize that's a hard question and it may not be answerable right here, but it's something that would tell me how much latent growth there still exists to accommodate and how much we're actually just gaining through expanding hours.
Right. Jeff?
Great question. We're doing a lot of work on that right now. So if you recall, the phase 1 of the mayor's plan expanded bus service by 10%. We've rolled out about 5%, a little bit more than that now, 6%. So we have a fair bit more in 2019 with the rolling out of the B line. So that will get us up to 10%. So not on an annualized sense, because they won't happen until later in the year. So over that period, we've had roughly 17% increase in ridership. So we're actually losing ground. Now we've rolled out more service on the rail, so we have been able to accommodate, but primarily in off-peak. So as we do the analysis, we're actually not keeping up, which is unfortunate, but it's a good situation that there is strong demand. More routes are getting crowded than where we started in 2016 at this point. So roughly there's a bit of a gap. If we were assuming it was going to be, at the time we thought it'd be about a 3% ridership, we're seeing closer to 6% a year, and we're not quite matching that with service.
So we're not being particularly conservative at the 2.4%. I guess that's really what I'm asking. I'm comparing it against what we've experienced over the last 2 years particularly, and 2.4% is about half of what we've experienced over the last 2 years, approximately.
I think Jeff is pretty aligned with the increase in service capacity.
It's aligned with the service capacity, and as far as what the projections are also though for next year, some of that is about the economy, and we've been experiencing so much rapid growth because of the amount of economic activity, and the forecasts are slightly lower than what they've been in the past, so that it's scaled to that.
So the changes in the fuel tax revenue that are proposed reflect basically a projection of flat revenues from fuel taxes as they currently exist, and some increases in relation to what we expect as an increase in fuel tax per liter. Is that right?
That is correct, slightly declining over time.
So the
per capita.
15 million kind of relates to the increased fuel tax level that we're anticipating for 2019?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so,
Mine works now. See, someone turned it on.
out,
Yeah. The whole ridership modeling takes into account many different variables too. It's not simply a matter of service. So employment, population growth has a big element to play. So the modeling has many different factors. That said, I will say, my philosophy when you project ridership growth and fare revenue, you're better off being conservative anyway. It's better to come out ahead than behind, because you basically are you're basing your expenditures on revenue. So if you're too optimistic, then you're gonna bust your budget basically against your revenues. So I think being somewhat conservative is probably the smart thing to do. 17% over 3 years is an awesome demand curve. That's not going to last forever anyway. But in any event, the economy is still projected to be strong next year in relative terms, and job growth is generally the #1 driver of ridership projections.
okay, so, sorry, we have Marcella and then Larry and followed by Karen. You did have a question? Okay, that makes it a little easier. So Larry?
Well, I'm kind of continuing the same topic. It just struck me, there's two questions I want to ask about this differential between the fuel tax and the fares. One is, you said the shortfall is like $6 million or something, roughly, and you casually said we're going to absorb that somehow. How do we do that? What are we doing to absorb that?
Okay, so I'm just using the data from our year-to-date financials and our expected for 2018. We have another couple of other areas that we're exceeding in revenue slightly, and government transfers goes up and down. Like I said, that's one of the factors. But and we have expenses coming in under budget. So we are when we look at the whole, that $6 million gap is being. We think we're, like knock on wood, we'll see when our final results come in.
So you feel
at the end
you're
of the year.
still
For 2018,
in a margin of error that
for 2018, yeah, it's much better than we had originally predicted, because we saw the fuel tax revenue drop, and we didn't know that we'd have an offset. We didn't know that the ridership growth would be where it's at, and we'd be able to hold the line on expenses, especially, as Kevin indicated, that when you get so much more service, we do have marginal expenses related to that service that would naturally, you would think, would increase as well. So there's been some good kind of fiscal management around that that has enabled, at least for 2018, to end much more favorably than we had originally anticipated, I would say.
My second point, and I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but it just seems that it's not very resilient to depend so much on continuing ridership increase when another source of funds is definitely on the way down. It seems that we should be taking other measures, and I assume that we will start taking other measures. I appreciated your last point. You just can't depend on that ridership just always going up.
No, and just to be clear on that point, on that slide, I'll just refer back to it quickly. The assumptions we made for 2019 is the lower fuel tax revenue assumption, dropping it by what we've already experienced and not expecting a rebound. And the transit revenue at a lower level, 2.4%-ish, compared to our actual growth rate. So
Okay.
they're both conservative
Okay, all right, thank
in
you.
that respect.
I really appreciate that
Okay.
last point, thank you.
To your point about resilience, though, Larry, and I think that is why this slide is somewhat important, is, fuel tax is a terminal revenue source for us. And, yesterday's climate announcement from the province that by 2040, any new car being sold in this province would have to be zero emission, basically electric, would suggest that revenue source will disappear. It's something that the organization and the mayors have been thinking about for quite some time. So again, we need to continue to be thinking about, from the long-term perspective, what is the status of the fuel tax revenue, and ultimately how will we replace that?
Yeah, yes.
Great. Karen?
Yeah, thank you. So the capital program and the forecast cash flows for 2019 was very thorough, and I appreciated being able to see that. I just had a question about whether there are any of those cash flows that are, sizable cash flows that you're watching that have either the volatility around either the amount or the timing. Are there any big ones that you're kind of watching that are a higher risk to us?
Yes, it's a good question. Probably the largest would be the South of Fraser contributions. I think we have budgeted around 1.6 billion. So it's just the timing, really, is given the change in direction
Yeah.
in that respect. So that would probably be the biggest one we're watching. But again, we can mitigate that with our borrowing program and others, just so we don't incur any unintended consequences as a result of that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, Rob, thank you for that, and also pass along our thanks to all the staff. I know there's hundreds probably that were involved
Yes, absolutely.
in getting ready for this budget. So there is a resolution that I'd like to move to accept the 2019 budget that was included in your package. So I'll move that motion. Is there a second? Ann, all in favor? Carried. Great, thank you. We're going to move to 5.4, which is the imposing development cost charges for regional transportation. As a board, we've actually seen these bylaws on a number of occasions, and this is actually the last step in the process because it has been approved by the inspector of municipalities. So Rob is here. He doesn't have a presentation for this, but obviously we're open to any questions that the board may have with respect to these bylaws. So, okay, seeing no questions, Larry is moving, seconded by Murray, all in favor? Great, approved. And then the last item is the parking rights tax bylaw. Of course, this is to reflect the rate increase to 24%. And again, I don't think Rob has a presentation because obviously we've had a chance to review this on a number of occasions, but are prepared to take questions if there's any questions for Rob. Okay, seeing no questions, I guess I'll move the motion. Is there a second? And second, all in favor? Great, approved. I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move to item number 6 on our agenda, which is the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee. And I'm going to turn this over to Chair Larry Beasley, who's going to give us a report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seemed to us at our last meeting that the policy people were cleaning house. And they took all the policy items they've been working on over the last year and they brought them all to the finish line. And it was beautiful to watch it, and they were very confident. What I would say particularly they're confident about is the amount of public engagement that went into these policy reviews. The number of people and the diversity of how they reached people was very strong. 5 of the items are on the agenda for this board to deal with today. Pets on transit, we are recommending, the staff recommended, we're recommending onto the board that we stay pretty much on course with our current policy. washrooms, where we are recommending a sea change to really begin to put in place a full washroom support system for our whole system, but in a way that's also intelligent and financially responsible. Public art, which is just really bringing up to date an existing policy and having done work with the arts community on that. Expansion of the MRN, which is in line with the mayor's vision. And then just a reinstatement of the Burnaby MRN, which was simply more of a procedural thing because they had to be removed for the construction of Evergreen. All of those items are coming forward. There are a couple of items where we were given updates. I won't go into those at this point. But we were pretty happy about the customer service items, 3 items in particular. 3 years ago, this committee wrote, unusually, a memorandum to the staff of the day outlining a series of ideas on customer service improvements. We were very happy to see over this period of time that the whole organization embraced the principles behind that idea of the customer service and customer focus, but also the number of those ideas from 3 years ago in that written report that have been taken up and in fact improved upon by the staff, so that now I think we can genuinely say, and I think you see it in our satisfaction rating of our customers, that the people are much happier with our system. And I think this emphasis, which we had a chance to deal with several aspects of in our last meeting, are very important. The one was to increase and diversify how we use advisory committees. And so putting that into a set of protocols so that our advisory committees are handled in a similar way across the very different things that we want to talk with the people of Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, and also our customers about. So we dealt with the protocols. Also constituency development, a strong theme of 3 years ago, is now being taken on as a very big idea, to the extent that even recently we had meetings of young people and students coming here to the offices to give their ideas and learn about the system. And also very excited, we were all very excited that the Customer Experience Action Plan is being rolled out, and we were told about how that was happening, as well as getting the quarterly report on communications. We wanted to give a lot of credit to Steve and the whole organization who have really embraced this customer service side of the equation in a very big way. So that's basically my report.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's move to item 6.2, which is the art policy, and Sandy has a report for us.
Thank you, Chair. And in front of you is a report to update the public art policy. We've had a policy since 2013 at TransLink, last updated in 2015. In the last 3 years, a few things have happened which gave us some really good learnings and lessons learned. We've introduced public art as part of the station upgrade program, and some of that art has been actually award-winning at New West Station and Joyce Station. And we learned a lot going through the process, working with the community to install those art pieces. And of course, in 2016, we opened the Evergreen extension, which had a public art component where we worked with the province and the communities to get that up. And it has also been very well received as an addition to our public art portfolio. I think the learnings going through what were really significant projects and investments in art showed us what we can do, what are the limitations of the policy that we had, and we took those learnings and embedded them in the update that's in front of you for consideration. So the updated policy provides better guidance for our capital project teams as they're working on developing, defining capital projects, on governance, selection, the goals and objectives, how to choose the public art, and how to work with the community and stakeholders to go ahead and implement. not forgetting the day-to-day maintenance and operations and upkeep of the pieces that we do own and that we will own as part of our capital projects. So why now? As you've been hearing throughout this meeting, we have a large capital program coming up. So this gives better guidance to our staff and the project teams on what to do next with our upcoming projects. And in the past year, working with Vancouver and Surrey on the major projects, it's been highlighted to us all the way up to councils, the importance of public art and having a robust program to support major capital investments. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Sani? I know this has been discussed at great length around the board, but Larry, you have a question?
I just would like to move the public art policy,
Okay.
and then I'll make a comment after this.
Okay. And seconder, thank you, Marcella.
I did want to say that this is actually state-of-the-art now, and I'm very happy to see that. I've done 3 or 4 different public art policies around the world, and this one now has covered all the bases, not just in targeting the art, but also how it's decided and the whole system, how you work collegially with artists. It's very excellent.
That's good to know, Larry. So thank you for that background. So any other questions, comments? I'll call for the question then. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you so much, Sani, for all your work on this and everybody else that in the organization that worked on it. Okay, the next item on the agenda, I'm going to invite up Jeff Cross, and I think Andrew, is Andrew coming or just you? I think we just get Jeff. Oh, okay.
In fact, unlike Sandy, I need lots.
Both
of
Andrew,
assistance.
okay. Reinforcements are coming.
Yeah.
Andrew
So-
Devlin and Andrew McCurran.
Exactly. So thank you, Andrew Devlin, our manager of policy, who's been leading this project, and Andrew McCurran, our director of strategic planning and policy. So just as a kickoff, this area we heard from the delegate earlier today. We've been hearing from delegates for a long time. We've had a lack of a really comprehensive policy, and it has been a thorn in our side for many years, and we were happy to take this up. It was a board priority. I believe early last year it was identified. So we have spent a significant amount of time to be able to kind of come around from an ad hoc one-off sort of approach to think about how are we fit for purpose for our expanding system, especially our expanding rapid transit rail system throughout the region. We've done a lot of work looking at peers, talking to our TransLink Listen panels, really understanding from an operational perspective, how would we make this happen, working across the enterprise. So we feel like we're in a very solid place. If you choose to go forward with the policy. Now, a policy statement like this is just the first step. It's not a funded actual priority at this point, so we would have to, as a follow-up, come back with how do we actually make this happen. We've got ideas, and that it's sort of that catch-22. You need to make sure we understand what's involved. So we've got some preliminary ideas, but we'll come back in 2019. So I'll turn it over to the Andrews.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I'm going to provide a bit of context. First, that really the question we're asking in this policy review and this discussion is, should TransLink expand access to customer washrooms on the system? So today, as you likely know, TransLink provides customer washrooms at C-bus terminals and on West Coast Express trains, and that's required by federal regulations. But beyond that sort of limited availability, we don't have customer washrooms at any of our other facilities. And as the board here is well aware, that's been a long-standing customer issue. We heard from Laura McEnroth this morning, again, that's particularly a concern for people with disabilities, seniors, people with children. It's a growing concern for a large number of our customers. So no policy currently exists to give us direction on if and how customer washroom access on the system should be provided or expanded. And so the intent of this review is to really take first step in that direction to give that clarity. So the report you've got in your agenda package highlights some of the activities we undertook in this review, some of the key highlights that we found in that research. Some transit agencies provide washrooms, most others don't. Partnerships are also emerging as a new a model for delivering public washrooms around the world. The public, and in particular our own transit customers, have told us through a survey, our TransLink Listens panel, that expanded access to washrooms is a really critical part of their experience, and if done well, would contribute to the likelihood of them using transit more often. So we do see this, should you choose to adopt the policy, as an important ridership growth, ridership development objective. Now, the challenge, the reason we haven't probably done it in the past is that there are a lot of operational concerns, there are costs, issues can and do happen at washrooms with respect to safety, vandalism, crime, and so the design and the actual execution strategy of public washrooms, especially at transit, is really critical to make sure this is done well. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Devlin to walk through the key components of the recommended policy.
Thanks, Andrew. So in your package, you do have the full policy. It's about a 3.5-page policy. Really at its core, what the policy does is commit TransLink to expanding access to customer washrooms on the system alongside all other amenities that we provide in order to provide a more exceptional experience for our customers and to grow ridership over time. Of critical note, the policy is really intended to provide direction for TransLink to consider when making future decisions about washrooms. The policy does not lay out a detailed implementation strategy. As part of the resolutions to the board, we're asking you to consider directing management to develop an implementation strategy that would outline some of the more detailed costs and implementation considerations guided by the policy, and we'll get to that later on. But I do want to walk through just two key components of the policy that are of critical importance in terms of how we would look to be making decisions about the provisions of washrooms for customers in the future. The first one is around the criteria that we're proposing to use for how we would determine the locations where efforts to expand washrooms are needed. Efforts to expand washrooms along the network need to be provided in a manner that makes these facilities available certainly to the most number of people at key points along their transit journey, while certainly balancing the need for reasonable coverage, but also our ability to deliver within available resources. So that's a key consideration to be thinking about. So as outlined on the screen, the proposed policy states that the TransLink should seek to prioritize providing washroom facilities at locations that have a high number of passengers throughout the day, have a high number of passengers experiencing long journey times on the system, and as well help to contribute to build out a network of evenly spaced washrooms, so customers are no more than a few stations or a few facilities away from a bathroom facility. The second key component is the actions that we would look to consider when providing washroom facilities on the system. So transit passenger facilities on our network are certainly diverse, and they all have unique designs and layouts and neighborhood contexts. And this diversity really requires us to consider a variety of potential actions for washroom access depending on individual facility context. Really, I don't think a one-size-fit-all approach works within the context of our system. So as outlined on the screen, the policy proposes that these actions may include activating existing spaces within a facility as space permits, delivering a new washroom facility as part of the development of new facilities or major upgrades to facilities, or the third action potentially being partnering with third parties, including developers, local government partners, or private commercial parties to deliver access to either existing washrooms or new washrooms along the system. So management's recommendation is here on the screen. We are recommending that the board approve the proposed policy and direct management to begin the development of an implementation strategy that would work towards identifying the specific options and an approach, a budget, and a timeline for delivering washrooms over time with an emphasis on partnerships. And we'd look to bring that to back to this table for consideration in 2019. So we'll leave it for any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions? I know this is Jonathan.
Thank you. Really appreciate the report and the direction that this is moving forward with. The question I have is relating to how this would be implemented in new stations, because I suspect this would be a lot easier to do from the start as opposed to retrofitting some of the older stations. But we are in a process, whether it's the Broadway subway line expansion or work in Surrey or other locations where we're building new facilities. And how does that integrate into that work? Is it already being fed into that, or I just want to see how that connects to those?
So certainly it's a much easier thing to do when you're building a new facility or doing a major upgrade. In terms of the ability to do that in our existing systems, I think this is what's required, speaks to the necessity for these multitude of potential actions that we'll need to look towards considering through the development of an implementation strategy. We've done an initial scan of some of these actions that may be amenable at various stations across the region, but more work is needed to do with our operating companies, with transit police, and with other partners to start to identify what some of those actions could be.
And we have been working with the project team, say on the Broadway subway project, to foresee that is a possibility. They've been in lockstep with us on that.
Good.
Thank you. Larry?
I just want to comment, this is a very big change from where we've been in the past, and I'm really pleased to see us moving in this direction. Not only do people have special needs, but I think we're all aging, and that in itself has special needs. I think the breakthrough was this idea of partnerships, because all of a sudden something that seemed out of our financial ability came within our financial ability. And so I'm really looking forward to that in the implementation. I personally, and I hope everyone else was touched this morning by Laura's testimony about the need for this and how widely that need is. And we found that also in the inputs that we got from the public as well. And so I'm hoping that in the implementation plan that you'll continue to consult with people who have that passion and that knowledge so that we've seen a conceptual map of the fair distribution of this throughout the system. And I think getting that really depends upon the input of all those users. And so hope that you're committed to that as you move forward to implementation.
Thank you, Larry. Andy, and then we'll go to Murray.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to pick up on the comments from the speaker this morning on accessibility of washrooms as well. She specifically mentioned gender neutral, which isn't specifically referenced in here, although we do include universal accessibility. And just something that is rising further, and it should be flagged as we build policy going forward, that all areas of accessibility and inclusiveness should be considered in developing the policy going forward from now.
Thank you, Andy. And Murray.
Thank you, Lorraine. Just a question regarding, we talked about, as well about this idea of developing an app or information around where washrooms currently exist to help people more immediately while we evolve a system that we're more responsible or directly responsible for. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, that's something we've had discussions with our wayfinding team just to actually make sure that we've got a good inventory and documentation of where those washrooms exist. And to the best of our abilities, we're already presenting those on static station maps. And so there are a number of discussions within the organization on a more customer-facing app for trip planning. And as we evolve our trip planner, that will be a component of that. But it actually is something we were already doing on the static map, so it's a matter of translating it into any digital material that we have.
And I realize that some washrooms are public and others aren't, and therefore there needs to be a care paid around that as well. So, but I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Marcella's got a question. Look, and her hand's kind of half up.
Actually, I was just going to check because I'm not sure, but I thought it did. I was thinking about the STA's little app, which accesses Google Maps right away. I think in Google Maps you can ask for washrooms. So I think the STAs, face to face can help people. But I'm not 100% sure. I just can't remember the last time I used it. Anyways, it's just something that you might take back and just check and take back to Hayden and his team. Not Hayden anymore, sorry. Mike.
Mike.
Sorry, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions in regards to the proposed resolution that we have in front of us? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to call for the question. All in favor of approving the resolution in front of us? Thank you all very much. All right, washrooms, here we come. Okay, on to number 6.4 of the agenda, the same crew in front of us, Jeff, Andrew, and we're going to talk about pets on transit.
My preface, Chair and board members, is that I want you to be very aware that we came into this with the objective of trying to understand how we might actually expand access. And similar to washrooms, people with pets having access to the transit system on its face could increase ridership. We're encouraging people to live close to transit, to be able to live without a private vehicle. So we went in trying to understand how might we do that, and looking at the trade-offs as well to what that means for our existing customers, and that's where really it comes down to. We also undertook this about the same time frame, so we used a very similar process, looking at where our peers are at using our TransLink listens panels. The delegate this morning mentioned that about us doing engagement. That is with both of our customers that exist today, and the TransLink listens panel also has just general traveling public, so we are able to get a sense of how people may be influenced by this policy to use transit more or less. So we feel like we do have a pretty good broad section of input, which is really critical to where the recommendations are today, because they're very context sensitive. It's really important to look at our peers, but every city has a slightly different context about what your norms are around how you travel and how you interact with your neighbors, pets, etc. So Andrew, you want to take it?
Yeah, and again, I'll just building on Jeff's context, wanted to frame up the review and the question here. So the focus is, should we expand access beyond our existing policy for customers traveling with pets? And just to clarify, our existing policy is that customers can travel with pets on the transit system as long as they're in an enclosed carrier that can fit on the customer's lap. And of course, provincially certified assistance animals are permitted on our system at all times. So this is really about non-provincially certified assistance animals. So as you heard this morning, Margaret and others over the years have presented to this board requesting the board to consider opening up this policy to allow uncaged pets to travel on the system. We, I think, as staff and as the board, agree that there's definitely merit in considering that request. On the positive side, there's the potential to allow a larger number of the region's residents to travel more easily around more of the region with their pets, lower cost, more affordable, helping to create a more transit-oriented region. Especially for the approximately 1/3 of households in the region that have a dog in the household. Our existing policy is in place to ensure that to try to strike a balance to ensure the safety and comfort of our general traveling public, that it's not put at undue risk and that people don't feel unduly uncomfortable in their travel experience. So the intent really of this policy review was to determine whether expanding access for customers to travel with uncaged pets was something that we should do, something that the board felt comfortable that we should do at this time. So I'll turn it over again to Andrew Devlin to walk through the results and the recommendation.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'll just, before I get to the recommendation, just highlight a couple of some of the key learnings. So as Jeff mentioned, we did a number of activities, including a peer agency scan, and work with our TransLink Listen survey panel, which I'll speak to the key findings from the two of those groups first. Really the takeaway from our peer review is that our current policy, the way it's structured right now, is considered common practice across peer agencies in North America. We looked at approximately 25 of the major transit authorities in North America and in Canada and the US. Our policy aligns with approximately 3/4 of those, including New York, Denver, Chicago, Los Angeles, and others. As Margaret did point out in her remarks earlier this morning, so there are agencies with less restrictive policies. These make up about a quarter of those agencies that we looked at, including Toronto and Calgary and Boston, among others. Of note, agencies that do permit expanded access for pets, so allowing uncaged animals on, still do have restrictions. These include requiring leashes or limiting travel to off-peak periods only. As well, many of these agencies that do permit expanded access have had their policies in place for many years. Staff interviews and media scans have identified that incidents of pet attacks and other impacts on passengers and other animals on board vehicles do occur from time to time at these agencies, so that is something to be aware of. From our TransLink Listens panel survey that was done in February, we did identify that support for changing our policy from both the public and our traveling customers today can be described as mixed. Two key findings I want to draw your attention to up on the screen here are questions we asked related to anticipated levels of satisfaction with one's transit experience if uncaged dogs were permitted on transit with restrictions, including leashes or muzzles or restricting them to a certain period of time. About 41% of individuals said they'd be less satisfied with their transit experience compared to about 20% saying they would be more satisfied. In terms of the anticipated impact of allowing uncaged animals on with restrictions on the frequency of transit usage, twice as many respondents indicated that they are likely to use transit less often than those who indicated they would likely use transit more often. Certainly there's a large portion, about 2/3, have indicated kind of no change to their usage, but this does suggest that potentially changing the policy may pose risks to ridership growth over time. As part of our work, we also conducted extensive engagement and consultation with key internal stakeholders, Coast Mountain Bus Company, BC Rapid Transit Company, and Transit Police. We also engaged TransLink's Access Transit User Advisory Committee to try and understand some of the key issues with our current policy and any potential opportunities or issues that they had with the notion of potentially expanding our policy. Certainly these groups, all of them, did acknowledge many of the benefits that both Andrew and Jeff highlighted in their earlier remarks in terms of allowing expanded access does contribute to the ability for more people to get around the region, especially those traveling with a pet. However, all of these groups did express concern around the increased likelihood of key issues or challenges occurring on the system compared to our existing policy, and many of these are up on the screen here. I do want to draw your attention to one item that's in your agenda package, which is a letter from TransLink's Access Transit User Advisory Committee, which did outline very specific concerns regarding the potential implications of allowing uncaged dogs or animals on the system, which may have impacts on riders with physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities as well. So in conclusion, certainly permitting access, expanded access for customers traveling with pets is likely to help reduce mobility barriers for those customers needing to travel with pets across the region. However, based on the available information, our review has indicated that by allowing expanded access, even with restrictions such as leashes or restricting access to certain times of day, the likelihood of challenges or issues associated with staff or customer safety, comfort issues, system efficiency issues, and others are likely to be at a level that is greater than under the existing policy framework. So as a result, management is of the view that our current policy strikes a reasonable balance of providing an option for individuals to travel with pets without unreasonable negative impacts to other transit riders. And as a result, our recommendation to the board, which is up on the screen, is that we recommend the current policy be maintained with efforts made on staff's part to continue to monitor industry trends and public sentiment to determine if adjustments to our policy may be needed into another point into the future. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you to the three of you for your presentation. Anne.
Thank you for the report. I'll state my personal biases first, just so that they're out there. I don't have pets, and dogs make me nervous. But I recognize that we need to continue to encourage public transit. People have pets for a wide range of reasons, and they mostly seem to like them. It baffles me why, but they seem to like them. I would wonder whether or not it would be possible to allow dogs outside of this criteria on a trial basis, outside of rush hour, on marked vehicles that had a decal or something that said there was possibility of having a dog on. So not every car on SkyTrain and not every bus. If I was choosing to get on that SkyTrain, I could pick a car that didn't have a dog decal, and if I was choosing a bus, I might wait for the next one if it had a dog decal, just because of how I feel about dogs. I know it's complicated, but it would seem to me to be an effort to see at least how it might work, and people would have the option of deciding whether to take that particular transit or not, depending on their personal preferences and experiences.
It's a valid question that we've been exploring. Are there places, either geographically within our system or times of day or pilots? And we've tried to take on all sort of three of those. One of the things, even with off-peak within our region, is we're quite busy across the day, and it's very hard to know exactly where there is actual physical capacity on the system. So you're still running into a lot of these issues. Saturdays on our system can be just as busy or busier than actually on a Friday. So the same sort of issues that Andrew raised with and that were pointed to by our customers, we think still exist during off-peak. Some of the systems that have, regional systems that have added that, are running a different kind of system like Go Transit, where they have large trains that are commuter trains. Off-peak, there's a lot of room on those. We don't really have those. And then in working with our operational issues, it gets really challenged to enforce it and to figure out where people are. So thirdly, once you put a pilot in, there are a lot of operational expenses in getting a pilot going. And it's very difficult to also pull something like that back. So those are the reasons why we recommended against a policy or a pilot. And Andrew, you wanted to add
I
what?
just wanted to build on one more item that's unique to this region in Canada, at least, is the nature of our automated rapid transit system, and that presents unique operational challenges and an additional layer of risk. And so likely the bus system could potentially be somewhere easier to try a pilot, but then if you're sort of limiting it to certain vehicles, then a passenger who might not want to board that vehicle would need to wait for another one. So those are some of the challenges that were considered, I think, in the pilot discussion.
Yeah, it's all a question of balancing interests and needs in a crowded city with lots of different wishes and desires. I just think if we acknowledge that people have pets and are going to continue to have them, and not everyone's going to have a car, and in fact car ownership will go down, I think eventually we're going to have to wrestle with this issue again. And my bias would be, I'm fine with the policy as proposed, but my bias would be to try and find some vector of openness that we can try to give people that option rather than try not to find it. I look for best practices and finding a balance that meets, you're not going to meet everyone's needs, we never do, but find a balance that does meet the legitimate interests of pet owners who want to not take the car, because I think that's an admirable goal.
Thank you, Anne. And I have Larry next.
Thank you. Well, I started this very open-minded about more pets, and I like pets, and it all seems fine. The one thing I want to make sure, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, is that we now do allow registered official guide dogs. So anyone who needs it to the point that they are supported by the whole organization of guide dogs is allowed on our system. So for me, given my general attitude about it, what was very pivotal was what the public told us. And I was surprised what the public told us. For every person who said it was a positive experience, 2 people said it was a negative experience. So even if you have a decal, one person would say, good, I'll wait for the next bus. 2 people will say, damn it, I have to wait for the next bus. And they'll feel it's a bad thing. For every one person who said it was they would use transit more, 2 people said they would use transit less. So it just seemed, while a lot of people were ambivalent, the marginal people who would be the people you would think about to increase ridership are the very ones that did weigh in, it seems to me, and said 2 to 1 that it probably wasn't in balance a good idea. And I think we have to go with that public opinion. But what really set my mind to support the recommendation was the letter from the Access Transit User Advisory Committee. I mean, these are the people who tell us when this system works and when it doesn't work from the point of view of differently abled people. And they were in no uncertain terms. They were crystal clear about saying that they didn't think that the system, the policy should be changed. And what really got me was their concern about what would happen to the registered guide dogs if there are other animals on the system. And so in balance, although I listened very carefully this morning to Margaret's comments and felt some sympathy for them, In balance, I think it is prudent to stay where we are. And maybe the idea of continuing to monitor the other systems that are being more experimental, we can, might come back in a few years. But right now, with this kind of public opinion registered and a very careful process and this advice from our convened advisory committee, I just think it would be prudent for us to adopt the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Larry. Tony?
Sorry, actually, Larry just covered the point I was going to make, and that was the access transit in terms of the concerns with guide dogs and other pets sort of mingling on train stations in particular. I think that's a serious issue that we need to be take into account.
All right, well, I think you've heard some messages that this should continue to be monitored. But I'm going to call for the question for the resolution that's in front of us, and that's on page 174, but it's also up on the screen, and that's to endorse management's recommendation. So all in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, so I think Andrew and Andrew are moving and leaving us. Thank you so much. And Sarah Ross is going to join us. Thank you, Sarah. And we're going to talk about the major road network expansion process. And we have two items on the agenda. One is an expansion, and then one is a reinstatement of some roads in Burnaby. So I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah's going to walk us through the presentation and the materials. This is an important delivery point on a commitment made by the board and the mayors through the Phase 1 investment plan. It's a long time coming. It's been, the major road network was downloaded and in some cases uploaded to TransLink in 1998 when we were created. Very little expansion other than sort of inflationary, about 1% per year has happened since that time. So there's been no sort of fundamental revisit to the major road network. It serves an incredibly important function. Sarah's going to show that. We think it's a really good step, and we've undertaken a really good collaborative process with our municipal partners, which we think was important because there are always more needs than means to be able to serve those. And so we're very comfortable with the recommendation before you on what the expansion looks like. Sarah, you want to take it?
Great, thank you. Before I walk through the expansion process and the recommendation, I will just touch a little bit about the second report for your consideration, which is the Burnaby report. And that's really just an administrative change to reinstate segments of roadway that were part of the MRN, but during the Evergreen extension construction, they were taken over by the province and therefore removed from the MRN because only municipal roads are in the MRN. And so this is just an administrative reinstatement of those segments. So that's what that second report is. But on the larger one, and that is we're seeking the board's approval of the amendment to add segments to the existing major road network, consistent with the commitment in the vision and in the investment plan to expand it by 10%. So before I go on, the major road network, MRN, is arterial roads in the region that carry large volumes of commuter, transit, and truck traffic. Thank you, Jeff. And so there are over 600 kilometers of roads, which actually translates to over 2,000 what we call lane kilometers. So if a road is 2 lanes, 1 kilometer segment, that is 2 lane kilometers. And almost every municipality in the region has some of their roads that are part of this major road network. And so TransLink provides funding for the ongoing operations, maintenance, and rehabilitation of the MRN. And so we provide, for every lane kilometer, we provide a municipality with just over $20,000 per lane kilometer that they use to fund the ongoing, their ongoing costs for that, to make sure that the roads are kept in a state of good repair. We also have other funding programs through a cost share formula that municipalities can use to make upgrades to the MRN to improve safety or the people moving capacity of the the roads. So overall, this is accounts for just short of about $50 million a year in our budget for the operations, maintenance, and rehabilitation. And so this, in the investment plan, we have, and in the 2018 TransLink budget, we have an allocation to increase that funding to enable a 10% expansion of the network. And as Jeff said, this will be the first significant expansion of the network since it was established in 1998. And I just want to be clear that this is around, this is an expansion of our major road network, not an expansion of roads in the region, because all of the roads we're talking about already exist. This is what we're doing is providing a higher level of regional funding to municipalities to ensure that the roads that really serve a regional function can be maintained and kept in a good state of repair. So working closely with our municipal peers, we updated the objectives that had been originally established back in 1998. And we did that so that we could ensure that it would reflect current regional policy direction, including our regional transportation strategy, the regional goods movement strategy that was done in 2017, as well as the mayor's vision. And so this is, and then the first 4 of these were used in the screening and evaluation process that we went through. And really it's around identifying the roads that are serving regional trips. So they're facilitating cross-regional movement of people and goods going to regionally significant destinations with high volumes of people, either in vehicles or on transit, and also of goods. And one of our criteria is also looking to have an interconnected and complete network, so there's connectivity there. And so those are the objectives that guided our process. And one thing I'll mention is that we went, the process that we went through, we worked very extensively with what we call the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee. So this is made up of local government staff, senior people who work in transportation at all of municipalities, and is our key forum for engaging with municipalities on regionally significant transportation issues. And so we started with them. First step was reviewing all of the asks, and so municipalities brought forward submissions for inclusion in this segment. We did a big work in reviewing all of that, making sure we had data and knew all the information we needed. And we had about 4 times the amount of requests for inclusion than we could accommodate within that 10% expansion envelope, I guess. So we went through a process with the municipalities, updated the objectives, established a screening and evaluation process, which was endorsed by our advisory committee, and then went through all of the technical evaluation, went through a weighting process with them, and then on September 27th of this year, the Regional Advisory Committee did fully endorse our proposed inclusions and the proposed network that is part of this. And so this map shows the existing MRN network, so that's what's shown in blue, as well as the segments that we are recommending for inclusion, which are shown in some undefined color, purple or something. They're a bit thicker, darker. And so as I mentioned, these are roads that we went through a performance-based process to determine that these are roads that are consistent with our objectives. And all of these are existing roads today. And so we are seeking the board's approval of the bylaw, which will formally establish these new segments as part of the major road network, thereby fulfilling that commitment in the mayor's vision and in the investment plan, and then enable us to ensure that the appropriate funding is transferred to the municipalities for the maintenance, operations, and rehabs of these roads, which they are responsible for implementing. So that is
Thank you, Sarah. Murray?
Thank you, Lorraine, and thank you, Sarah. The two questions. One is the $20,000 per year amount. Has that been inflated to some index over the course of time to ensure that it's current relative to the needs of maintaining roads?
Yes, and on a periodic basis, we go through an assessment of what the costs are, because our policy guidance is that we're funding the full costs of operating, maintaining, and rehabilitating those. So that has been adjusted, and there is inflationary adjustments.
So there isn't much pushback coming from municipalities regarding that number?
No, there's not.
Okay. And the second question, once we add road segments in as opposed to lane kilometers, is that right?
No, we take a road segment, and then we calculate how many lane kilometers there are for each of those segments, and then the funding is based on the lane kilometers.
So once a segment's in, it's in regardless of its cross-section? So in other words, if a municipality goes from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane divided cross-section, then we expand the funding to reflect the new cross-section once it's in. So there isn't any approval process around that.
That's correct, that there is an approval process in that some of the changes, once a road is in the MRN network, there is some constraints to municipalities on the types of changes that they can and can't do. But yes, we do also account, and it's usually about 1% a year, to allow for some of those small growth within the existing network. If, for example, a left-hand turn bay is added, that would have a little incremental amount.
I guess so we respond to those kinds of things as a matter of course. In other words, it's not approval. Municipalities still have free rein to adjust roads without approval from TransLink that are in the network.
They can go on the positive end, add a left-hand turn bay or something like that. They can't restrict the movement without our approval.
But
And
what about that issue of like expanding, like there's been many examples where like 200th Street went from a 2-lane road to a 6-lane road in parts, and
generally what happens is they do engage with TransLink and actually look also for co-funding to be able to do so. So we have a role
so
in that process.
the capital side allows us some opportunity to be engaged in those processes. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Sarah, in that huge package that I read last night, did I actually see a letter from every single municipality supporting this?
Yes, because we have gone through a process with them to confirm, because once you approve the bylaw, it will be designated as MRN. And so before you approve that, we needed to get confirmation from every municipality that they are in support of that and accepting of that.
So with 4 times the initial request coming in, you managed to get all the municipalities to agree. That is amazing.
Oh, wait a minute. Jack's saying otherwise here.
Is that not right?
There is one clarification. Someone needs to turn their mic off. Thank you. So the letters are for those municipalities where there are MRN sections coming in. So there are a few municipalities that there are not, if you go through the map, that are
No changes.
There are no changes. While RTAC had consensus around the table that this process made sense, there are some municipalities that definitely did not necessarily get their submission through.
And I did not see any letters of opposition from those municipalities. Am I right about that?
We just didn't get shown them, no.
No, we did not formally get any letters of objection to the process.
Okay.
Murray? Oh, so moved, okay. So we have this resolution, then we have the Burnaby resolution as the secondary one. So we'll vote on this one first, which is the 236 lane kilometers for the MRN. So all in favor? Thank you. And then we're going to move to the next which is really, as Sarah described earlier, a housekeeping item to reinstate the Burnaby roads. So all in favor of that reinstatement? Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Well done. I know that's a lot of work. It didn't take long for us to approve it, but it's because you did such great work. So thank you. Okay. So now we move to Anne, who has HR and Governance Committee report.
Thank you, and I think I'm the last thing on the agenda, so I'll keep my discussion to about an hour. Is that correct?
That's excellent.
Right, really, I'll be very, very brief. Yes, you will, it's one page. Our committee has met. We spent quite a bit of time talking about governance. I should just say, by way of background, looking across the world actually at best governance models for transportation authorities, and came back with quite a number and a collection. And I spent some time looking at those and found that many of the transportation authorities around the world are looking to TransLink as a model of governance. So that was an interesting exercise. With respect to human resources matters, we have been looking at our framework for collective bargaining, conducting and overseeing a board evaluation survey, reviewing and recommending the upcoming committee structure, membership and appointment also of the vice chair, and reviewing the management succession plan, carrying out the first steps of the CEO performance review for this year, and also setting CEO annual goals for 2019. We've also been making sure as a committee that steps are in place to keep the board up to date on harassment and other changing workplace issues. The board needs to be educated, remain educated, and take a leadership role. So that's an ongoing project. And we've also been considering and examining executive recruitment and general recruitment practices. So that's my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Anne in regards to her report? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm going to,
Madam Chair, sorry.
Yes,
Would you
sir.
mind if I had the floor for a few comments?
Sure.
Great. So I actually have the privilege of saying a few words to express the board's appreciation for the time that you've spent on the TransLink board. So as Lorraine mentioned, she's been on the TransLink board for 6 years and unfortunately reached the limit of time that people are allowed to serve on the board. So I'm not sure who made that rule up, but we probably should have revisited that last year, yes. So during your time on the board, Lorraine has served in a number of areas. In 2016, you were chair of the Stakeholder Relations and Services Committee, and obviously for the last 2 years, you've been chair of the board. One other small task that Lorraine had was she was involved in the subcommittee that did the CEO search. And of course, that search led to the hiring of Kevin, so excellent work with respect to that committee. There you go. So obviously during Lorraine's tenure, TransLink has really experienced a huge amount of success, particularly the last 2 years when you've been in the chair. We've had increasing ridership, increasing customer satisfaction, full funding of the mayor's vision in terms of phase 1 and 2, really an unprecedented investment in transit infrastructure, and all that happened under your tenure, so great job in that area. Now, as chair, Lorraine has demonstrated, I think, extraordinary leadership skills and really a strong commitment to TransLink, both to our employees as well as to our customers. And Lorraine's also worked really hard to ensure a positive working relationship with the Mayor's Council and with the province. Now, another one of Lorraine's duties is to also ensure a good working relationship with the board. Her job is to manage the board, and of course, as you know, all of us sitting around the table, we're all pretty strong-willed, we're pretty independent, opinionated, and dare I say, there's a few characters on this board. So, an excellent job of keeping us in line. So, Lorraine, your time as chair really has been characterized, I think, by a clear vision and a passion, along with a great sense of humor and humility. Your energy and devotion to the role actually will be difficult to match, but you have left TransLink a better organization and on a strong footing for those of us who are going to be following you. So thank you for your dedication, the great job you've accomplished in TransLink, and we really do wish you all the best in your future endeavors. So again, on behalf of the board, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not going to say anything else, or I will start to cry. So I'm going to call the meeting to adjournment. I did get a note after my last little blubbering experience that Minister Robinson, Selena Robinson, was watching and sent me a text and said how nice that was. So I'm going to sign off and say goodbye to Minister Robinson and to all those that are streaming online and watching. Thank you very much for taking the time to care about TransLink. Okay? So.